The dream of human flight and exploration of the heavens was born in ancient times in the form of myth. It was fostered over the centuries by scientists like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton. Only in this century did man finally get off the ground in a plane in 1903. Since then, the development of technology to transport people through air and space has been staggering. Virtually overnight, the way we look at our world has been altered, and our ideas of time and distance changed forever. History has linked two Americans, Robert Goddard, a visionary man of science, and Neill Armstrong, a scientific man of action, in perhaps the single most impressive achievement of the 20th century. This is the story of their quest and the culmination of an age-old dream of poets and scientists alike, to reach the moon.
Moon, blue moon, dip dip dip, moon, 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 blue moon, dip dip dip, moon, 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 blue moon, dip dip dip, bomb, 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 dang, 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 ding it on, blue moon. You saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. Dang it, dang, dang, ding it on blue moon. You knew just what I was there for. You heard me saying a prayer for someone I really care for. And then there suddenly appeared before me the only one my arms would ever somebody whisper, please adore me. And when I look, the moon is dead to gone.
Robert Goddard, born in 1882, little known and even less appreciated in his lifetime, was America's pioneer of modern rocket science. The formulas and patents spawned by his originally primitive experiments gave us the means to explore space half a century later, climaxing in the historic landing of Neil Armstrong on the moon. Growing up in Massachusetts, Goddard excelled in mathematics and science, but he also loved the space fantasies of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. He studied at Worcester Polytechnic and Princeton before joining the physics department at Clark University. His marriage to Esther Kisk began a partnership in which the stalwart young bride served as chief cook, secretary, and lab assistant in the field. As early as 1919, Goddard published papers asserting travel to the moon was possible. Fellow scientists scoffed at his ideas, but Goddard went on testing them.
Every part of the rocket had to be just so and mesh, hundreds of them. So this was no small thing, but steady, steady thought, day after day after day, and of course trying it out next day in the shop, day after day. This is perhaps what you call genius, but genius must then be just plain capacity for hard work.
In 1926, Goddard successfully tested the world's first liquid fuel rocket, but 3 years later, the fireworks from another experiment alarmed suburban Worcester residents, accustomed to silence in their skies. They thought a plane had crashed. Goddard's portrayal in the press as a crackpot had one good result. It attracted the curiosity of aviation pioneer Charles Lindbergh, who in 1927 had become the first man to fly the Atlantic. An historic meeting was arranged between the scientist neighbors called the Moon Man and the pilot of the humble single-engine prop plane known around the world as the Spirit of St. Louis.
And Lindbergh and Harry Guggenheim, who was a friend, had financed some of the Lindbergh trips, and who had been a Navy pilot in World War I and understood aeronautics. They knew some breakthrough had to come, that we had exhausted this level of aeronautics and something new had to come. And so they were very much interested in this new thing. And Lindbergh came up, we sat on this porch and talked, and I remember I had some chocolate cake and Mr. Lindbergh ate 2 or 3 pieces by the fireplace, And he went back and reported to Harry Guggenheim that he thought there was something here.
Guggenheim decided to fund Goddard's research on the strength of Lindbergh's crucial recommendation. In 1930, a $50,000 grant enabled the Goddards to move their rocket experiments to the open spaces of Roswell, New Mexico. An old windmill adapted as a launching tower became, in the words of Lindbergh, a great monument to human achievement. For here, Goddard performed both static and in-flight tests to establish fundamentals of rocket flight astronauts still operate by today. Lindbergh was convinced of Goddard's genius and fascinated with the implications for aviation in his work on jet propulsion. For 11 years, except for one 2-year teaching stint back at Clark, Goddard, Esther, and 4 assistants labored to achieve the 3 goals without which space travel would be an unacceptable risk: reliability of propulsion, stability of flight, and the ability to bring a rocket back in one piece. Launch day in the 1930s may have lacked the crowds and the ceremony of Cape Canaveral, but countdown could be just as nerve-wracking. This launch in December of 1930 tested a pressure tank used to force liquid oxygen and petrol into the combustion chamber of an 11-foot-long rocket. The rocket rose to an altitude of 2,000 feet and reached a speed of 500 miles an hour. In this pre-electronic age, Goddard measured results with instruments like barographs and recording telescopes, fashioned by hand in his own workshop. And the family van usually doubled as the recovery vehicle. Intervals between launch dates ranged from 7 to 28 days. For Goddard and his loyal crew, although they were serving science, every launch day had an intimate quality, a cross between a scavenger hunt and a family picnic. The stabilizing gyro vane was one of hundreds of innovations now basic to rocket design that Goddard created in the decade he spent at Mescalero Ranch, as was his far-sighted parachute recovery system. Throughout the 1930s, Goddard tested larger and more sophisticated rockets. The U.S. defense establishment failed to recognize the applications for weaponry in Goddard's experiments. But in Germany, Dr. Werner von Braun and other scientists were already busy on a top-secret project to build V-1 and V-2 missiles. The Germans made sure they acquired copies of the hundreds of patents Goddard filed during this period. Goddard had failures as well as successes. The dream of spaceflight he had nurtured as a child now took the form of a high-altitude rocket he called Neill. In 1938, his latest version of Neill reached a height of 5,000 feet. But whenever he invited potential investors to witness a launch, something went wrong. Once both his rocket and his launch tower were destroyed by a tornado. Goddard may have impeded his own quest for spaceflight by his secretive nature, as shown by his habit of protecting his ideas and his reluctance to join the American Rocket Society until near the end of his life. The complex nature of rocket science would seem to depend on help from many hands and heads. Yet in later years, Dr. von Braun called Goddard's work in New Mexico, which came to an end in 1941, one of the most amazing lone wolf development programs in the history of technology. By this time, tests of Germany's new rockets were underway by Hitler's military, and it wouldn't be long before they were put to use.
Usually, war will bring very fast development of anything that can possibly be used as a weapon. He was not particularly surprised. He just wished that the United States could summon up some interest in it. He had been trying to do it for several years. In fact, in the year 1940, Mr. Harry Guggenheim and my husband went to Washington to a meeting of the heads of Army, Navy, and Air Force, and told them what this would do, what it could do. But there was no interest at all. One day when the news had been pretty bad in the newspapers, he looked up at me and he said, "You know, Esther, we may be able to get off this planet just in time."
Meanwhile, the man who would fulfill Goddard's prophetic statement, Neill Armstrong, was growing up in a small-town atmosphere in rural Ohio. The family moved frequently because of his father's job as a state auditor, and Neill carried from place to place his obsession with model airplanes and flying. His high school projects reveal the same passion.
Possibly Neill's outstanding project, for which I remember him best, is his work in connection with study of aviation and the building of a wind tunnel.
Well, he built it so strong that it caused great currents in the home and of course, vibrated the whole home. It was one of those things that he enjoyed most, and Mr. Kreitz, his teacher, was very instrumental in helping him.
I can remember how scared I was when he first flew from the airport to the university. Then, let's see, before school started, why they need to go in a week or so ahead of time and make all their preparations. And so he flew this particular time, and I know he said, "Now, Mom, when I go over the house, when I waggle my wings, you know I'm saying hi to you." And so I can remember how scared I was. You know, I said, "Well, how will you find the place to land?" Oh, he said, "I'll find it."
As a youngster, Neill did odd jobs for 40 cents an hour to pay for $9 flying lessons at the local airfield. He learned to fly even before he could drive, obtaining his pilot's license on his 16th birthday. Robert Goddard had fallen seriously ill by this time with tuberculosis, and in 1945, the father of modern rocketry died. 6 years later, Neill Armstrong narrowly escaped death when he was shot down in his Panther jet during the Korean War. He flew a total of 78 combat missions as a Navy pilot and was awarded 3 air medals. After the war, Neill resumed his studies at Purdue and Stanford, obtaining a PhD in aeronautical engineering. Armstrong was a new breed of pilot, master of his airship and of the science behind it. He'd be a prime candidate for the adventure in outer space about to unfold.
Some are happy with sheer power. Others prefer more refinement. Happily, you can now have both. The 16-valve Renault Clio.
There it is, the ice planet. Go for their super satellite.
Platt's on attack. Lower the rocket. Save the satellite.
I've got it! Oh no! Keep cool when you discover the new ice planet from Lego System.
And if I get there, I've got to win.
Achiever Award. Who'd have thought it a year ago? You see, I've been at NatWest for 20 years, quite happy when, I don't know, I started to feel that perhaps I needed something new, a change. Then someone suggested moving into pensions and life. Well, at first, the training was hard, I'll admit. Like being back at school. At my age. But I passed with flying colours, so to speak, and I was out on the road. And then, do you know what really stood me in good stead? It was my 20 years at the bank. I knew about people, you see. That's what I do now, really. Go out, meet people, sort out their problems. I've never looked back. How NatWest changed my life. Never looked back. You could use that in one of your advertisements. Never looked back. Never looked back.
All around you, if you know where to look. Some you may have forgotten. Some you will never forget. From the vaults they're back again. They are films and TV shows, from the sublime to the ridiculous. From midday to midnight, they live on. Bravo. Time warp television.
Phone 0506 484848 to continue receiving Discovery as a UK satellite service. Cable viewers and Sky Movie subscribers are not affected. They may not carry bombs or guns, but these invisible soldiers are just as deadly. Spies. Drilled in the techniques of espionage, their fragments of intelligence data could lead to mass destruction, turn wars, or avert crises. The Secret World of Spies, Tuesday at 8 on Discovery.
From 1945 to 1958, this country did nothing, absolutely nothing, to develop rockets. I have been told that there was fierce rivalry among all three services, to the point where one service would say to the others, if I don't have charge, nobody is going to get it. But what happened was that in '58 came Sputnik, and poor Dr. von Braun had been here trying to get something to go, but the military was in the way. When Sputnik came, that was a real sting, and we could not tolerate further delays.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket. Here, an artist's conception of how the feat was accomplished. A three-stage rocket. Number one, the booster, in the class of an intercontinental missile. Its weight estimated at 50 tons. The smaller second stage took over at 5,000 miles an hour and carried on to the highest point reached. 500 miles up, the artificial moon is boosted to a speed counterbalancing the pull of gravity and released.
When Sputnik was launched, Neil Armstrong was flying experimental supersonic planes in California. While Soviet leaders savored their propaganda victory, United States President Eisenhower responded defensively.
Our satellite program has never been conducted as a race with other nations. Rather, it has been carefully scheduled as part of the scientific work of the International Geophysical Year. I consider our country's satellite program to be well designed and properly scheduled to achieve the scientific purposes for which it was initiated.
The Soviets next launched Sputnik 2 with a dog on board. As Americans struggled to understand the shocking new technology of space, one thing was clear. Soviet military development of huge rockets to carry heavy hydrogen bombs had given them the lead in space exploration. Back in Washington, Werner von Braun, now a US citizen, and a young national security advisor named Henry Kissinger did not mince words about the threat posed by the Soviet space program.
I believe there's no question that right now the IRBM and the ICBMs are very important, but I'm convinced that the Russian concept, that's as demonstrated by Sputnik number 2 carrying this animal, is very clear. They consider the control of space around the Earth very much like, shall we say, the great maritime powers considered the control of the seas in the 16th through the 18th century. And they say if we want to control this planet, we have to control the space around it.
A drastic reorganization of the Defense Department is essential in order to bring our strategic concept in line with a very rapidly changing military situation abroad.
The creation of NASA and the first US Space Center in 1958 ended the inter-service rivalries that Kissinger deplored. But the popular view of what this all meant was more science fiction than science fact.
High adventure in the wild, vast reaches of space. Missions of daring in the name of interplanetary justice. Travel into the future with Buzz Corey, Commander-in-Chief of the Space Patrol.
Take your squads and conduct a thorough search of every room and office in this building. You start with the first floor and work your way up. You start with this floor and work your way down, that's all.
Yes, sir. Gee, Commander, I wonder where they could be hiding. This is an awful big building.
In 1961, President Kennedy, acting on a premise Robert Goddard had first set forth in a technical paper in 1919, gave voice to the country's mission in space.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Selected for Project Mercury, the first 7 astronauts entered into a legend, thanks in part to a bestseller by author Tom Wolfe, later made into a movie called The Right Stuff. At Edwards Air Force Base, Neil Armstrong was now project pilot on the X-15 rocket engine plane, the closest thing to a winged spacecraft ever built. He made 7 flights on the X-15 to altitudes of 200,000 feet. A stoic, rather than a flamboyant figure, Armstrong convinced NASA that he too had the right stuff and would be chosen for its most challenging mission. While Neil logged a total of 1,100 hours in supersonic flight, astronauts at the Houston Space Center trained in the Mercury space capsule, complete with escape hatch. There would be 20 test and orbital launchings for the Mercury program, and the question of personal safety was always on the public's mind.
I understand none of you feel the danger here is as great, and certainly not any greater than flying a hot new experimental jet. Is that right?
Yes, this is quite true. We feel that we have less of a chance here when the shot finally goes than we have taken in past experiences in test flying.
Colonel Glenn, you broke the speed record not so long ago. How do you feel about it?
Well, we all feel pretty much the same way on it. I think there are dangers inherent in something as new as this. I think we don't want to minimize any dangers involved here, but it certainly is going to be well within the capability of the program to bring us back safely. We're all going to be convinced of that before we go.
But mishaps, aborts, and tragic accidents did occur in both the US and Soviet space programs, reminding us that manned flight requires the human element of courage. Robert Goddard's moon rockets failed to launch or blew up on him a number of times, but they never carried pilots. On Apollo's launch pad, Neil Armstrong would be sitting on the equivalent of a 36-story building filled with 6 million pounds of fuel. Preliminary flights using animals like the rhesus monkey took some of the human risk out of NASA's necessary testing. By monitoring the tiny primate's physiological condition from liftoff to recovery, scientists learned what pilots could expect to experience in space. Every time NASA made an advance, however, the Soviets seemed to make a bigger one. In 1961, shortly before Neil Armstrong joined NASA as its first civilian astronaut, Yuri Gagarin became the first man to orbit the Earth. A month later, it was finally time for NASA to make a major mark in space, as Alan Shepard prepared to board the Mercury Redstone missile and Freedom 7. Millions watched the live coverage of his suborbital flight, for by now, the space race was a major television event. In his 16-minute flight, Shepard reached an altitude of 116 miles and experienced weightlessness for 5 minutes. Freedom 7 didn't match Gagarin's flight, but it commanded respect, even as the president admitted publicly for the first time America was behind the Soviets in space. But as Armstrong joined NASA, the work of the agency's 34,000 scientists and engineers moved into high gear.
T-minus 18 seconds and counting engine start. May the wee ones be with you, Thomas. Good Lord, ride all the way. Godspeed, John Glenn. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. The clock is started.
John Glenn made 3 orbits of the Earth in his flight and became the first American to circle the planet and return safely. It was the high point of the Mercury spacecraft program. The stage was now set for Gemini, the crucial tests of manned orbital flight planned as the prelude to the attempt on the Moon. As command pilot of Gemini 8, Armstrong showed grace under pressure when his spacecraft began gyrating out of control while in orbit. Coolly taking the throttle, he guided it back on course, convincing NASA he was indeed their premier flyer. The Gemini program leading up to Neil Armstrong's flight to the Moon launched 10 manned orbital flights around the Earth. Each pioneered a different phase of space travel. Ed White walked in space during his flight, while Armstrong executed NASA's first manual docking maneuver in another. Every Gemini flight produced invaluable data and procedures for Project Apollo, as the US seemed to be closing the gap in the space race. In what he once called his flying bedstead, Armstrong practiced lunar landing techniques. He worked in simulators 10 to 14 hours a day for Apollo, but it was the free flight trainer that almost killed him. On his last flight in the flying bedstead, Armstrong managed to bail out moments before the craft malfunctioned. Close calls were inevitable in the race to master all the elements of space travel. Test pilots understood this better than most Americans, who were becoming complacent about the growing success in space. Then, during a simulated launch of Apollo 1 in January 1966, all confidence was lost as fire broke out in the pure oxygen atmosphere of the capsule, killing the 3 crew members trapped inside. Virgil Grissom, Ed White, the first American to walk in space, and Roger Chaffee were the ill-fated astronauts. An investigation found so many flaws in Apollo's workmanship, quality control and design that the program was halted for 18 months. America's future in space looked grim. But in 1967, Apollo came back bigger, better and safer. In 7 flights over the next 21 months, every system and procedure planned for the moon landing was tested, including the LEM, the lunar module itself. By the summer of 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins were ready to attempt the greatest technological triumph in the history of mankind. The Launch Control Center at Cape Kennedy would experience tense hours leading to the launch of the Apollo, but mission control in Houston would be on tenterhooks for 8 unforgettable days. Armstrong, as flight commander, was well aware of the generations of scientists going back to Goddard and before who had laid the groundwork for this mission. We were 3 individuals, he once recalled, who had drawn in a kind of lottery a momentous opportunity. Buzz Aldrin, whose own father had studied physics under Goddard, was co-pilot of Eagle, the lunar module designed to put them on the moon and get them off it. As pilot of Columbia, the command module, Mike Collins was to orbit the moon while beneath him, if all went as planned, Neil Armstrong would become the Earth's first visitor to another world. Cocoa Beach tried to find room for 1 million space fanatics that week, but the Apollo commander kept his emotions in check.
Well, every launch day is a time of excitement, enthusiasm, and apprehension. But I think in most circumstances, you always feel that the chances of actually lifting off are fairly distant or remote, and you have to temper your enthusiasm with the realization that, in fact, you may be coming back in and trying to go another day.
With all systems go in the pre-dawn hours of July the 16th, Armstrong led his crew to launch pad 39A. The Ohio farm boy, who had survived so many skirmishes with disaster in the air, exhibited cool confidence this morning. Yet he once admitted he thought this Apollo flight had about as much chance as a blind hen in a fox's den. Having come this far, the last thing any of the astronauts wanted was a delay.
At that time, I was most interested in just getting that thing off. Above all, I did not want to recycle, to have to empty out those gigantic fuel tanks and try again a different day. I just desperately wanted to go on the 16th of July.
When the sun came up, it was certain that the weather would not force a postponement. It promised to be a great beach day in more ways than one.
The swing arm now coming back as our countdown continues. Skip Chauvin informing the astronauts that the swing arm now coming back. Will be coming up in the automatic sequence about 10 or 15 seconds from this time.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 52 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Roger, we got a roll program. Tower cleared. Roger, roll. Complete and mission program. One Bravo. Well, Houston, you're good at 1 minute. Shut down right on time. 1.4 by 103.6. Roger, shut down, and we copy 101.4 by 103.6. Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are confirmed to go...
2.5 minutes after launch, the first stage of the Saturn rocket separated. The second stage would lift Armstrong and his crew into orbit at a speed of 15,000 miles an hour.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are go for TLI, over.
Apollo 11, thank you.
Roger out.
It would take Armstrong almost 76 hours to leave Earth orbit and reach the Moon, a little more than twice the time it took Lindbergh to fly from New York to Paris in 1927, and with better views.
Hi, Houston, Apollo 11. How many miles out do you have it now? Roughly about 50,000. Beautiful sight.
Once they were in orbit, about 70 miles from the Moon's surface, the next job was for Armstrong and Aldrin to enter the lunar module, Eagle, and make it ready for uncoupling from the Columbia.
It is doing a minute right up in there. We're about to open our hatch now. Right. Buzz Aldrin reporting that he's halfway into the LEM. This view is inside the LEM cabin.
Okay, let's go there, Capcom on the hot fire. Okay, all flight controllers going around the horn, gonna go for undocking.
Okay, retro, go. Fido, go. Guide, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go.
When the undocking procedure was completed, the deluxe version of Armstrong's flying bedstead would be on its own for the first time.
Hello, Eagle, Houston, we're standing by, over. Roger, Eagle, undocked.
Now, as Eagle began its descent to the Moon, overloads in the computer guidance system created a problem.
I think the major concern that we had was we felt we needed a confirmation as soon as possible from the ground, and the computer alarms did interrupt what both of us were doing, which was a systematic surveying for myself of the inside of the cockpit, and Neill was concentrating his attention on outside, and as soon as a computer alarm would go off and it would display something, he'd have to stop looking outside where he should be looking to see what was happening, and then we'd have to get a response from the ground as to what the nature of that was, clear the display, and then be able to proceed on.
1.5 down.
When Armstrong saw the computer had picked a boulder field to land in, he took manual control of Eagle. He made a deft U-turn and maneuvered through flying dust to a better site. The pulse rate of the unflappable Neill Armstrong raced to 156 as the lunar module prepared to touch down.
Altitude, velocity light. 3.5 down. 220 feet. 13 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely. 200 feet. 4.5 down. 5.5 down. 160 feet. 6.5 down. 5.5 down. 9 forward. Good. 120 feet. Picking up some dust. Okay, engine stop. ATA at a descent. Mode control both auto. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The adrenaline was flowing on board Eagle, and no one objected when Commander Armstrong cancelled plans for a nap and began preparations for his historic walk on the wild side of space. Armstrong worked his way through the Eagle's forward hatch in the bulky spacesuit, and all at once, the moon was at his feet.
In the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
On Earth, an estimated 600 million people, 1/6 of the world's population, were glued to their television sets. All eyes on one man, Neill Armstrong of Wapakoneta, Ohio, climbing down a ladder.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It had taken 8 years and $26 billion to get there, but Armstrong's immortal one-liner came to him at the last minute.
Well, actually, I didn't worry about it until after landing because I guess in my own view we didn't have that good a chance of completing a successful landing. But it was, I did think about it between the time of landing and the time when we actually exited the spacecraft. Buzz and I did that.
There seems to be no difficulty in moving around as we suspected. It's even perhaps easier than the simulations of 160 that we performed in various simulations on the ground. Absolutely no trouble to walk around. Oh, that looks beautiful, Neill. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
Relieved not to sink into the lunar quicksand some experts predicted he would find on the moon, Armstrong set about collecting rock and soil samples as Buzz Aldrin prepared to join him in this unearthly place.
certainly the views from space have given all of humanity an increased appreciation and awareness of this planet.
The plaque Armstrong left on the moon conveyed a message of hope and cooperation he would preach long after the mission.
There's two hemispheres, one showing each of the two hemispheres of Earth. Underneath it says, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. It came in peace for all mankind."
As Armstrong planted the American flag, some recalled this had been the boy growing up in the Depression who built model airplanes out of whatever materials he could scrounge. Meanwhile, Michael Collins, the man not assigned to moon duty, had his work cut out too.
Well, I enjoyed being in the command module by myself. It was a happy little home. All the machinery was working properly, and my concerns were not within the command module, but simply that something might go wrong with the LEM, with the lunar module, and these two guys might get stuck on the surface of the moon. That was my main concern.
Armstrong and Aldrin spent the night on the moon, but Neill had trouble sleeping. The glare of the Earth kept shining in his eyes.
Do you want to feel invigorated first thing in the morning? To have your senses stimulated for that all-over feeling that leaves you refreshed throughout the day?
The Rock and Roll Breakfast Show with Ross and Jono, weekdays 6 till 10 on Virgin 1215.
Finding low-cost life assurance can be a tricky business, but now with Cornhill's new family cover plan, it's easy. Specially designed for people under 50, it's a 10-year policy for up to £50,000 of life cover with payments starting from as little as £8 a month. That's just 26 pence per day. And there's more good news. Cornhill requires no medical details or tests. You just sign a simple declaration when you apply.
That sounds nice and easy.
Well, you know what to do. Call us free on 0800 44 6644. The family cover plan also takes care of you if you become terminally ill, with half the benefit paid out straight away, helping to make your remaining time more comfortable.
That's a sensible idea.
Well, you know what to do. Dial Cornhill free on 0800 44 6644 for written details on the family cover plan. Operators are standing by to take your call. Phone now. It could be the most important call you make today.
From September the 1st, the Discovery Channel will be scrambled, available only to subscribers. Existing cable viewers in Europe and Sky Movie subscribers are not affected. All other satellite viewers will need to fill in this form to be sure of receiving Discovery, along with up to 13 other channels as part of Sky Multi-Channels. To be certain of avoiding a delay to your service, please send your completed form soon. Turn to the Discovery Channel and make the voyage. This is a story 50,000 years old. The history of the Pacific Ocean and the people who live around and across its vast expanse. From the first men and women to see these islands to their descendants down to the present. How half the world's people came to be the way they are today. The Rhythm of Life in Man on the Rim, Wednesday at 10 on Discovery.
Robert Goddard traveled with Neil Armstrong to the moon in the form of a book he carried as a tribute to America's rocket science pioneer.
Is pinged, and you're cleared for takeoff.
Now it was time to see if they could get back from the moon.
Roger, understand. We're number one on the runway. Roger. Rate scale 25, 8, 7, 6, 5. Port stage, engine arm ascent, proceed.
Although the liftoff from the moon went without a hitch, it's worth remembering there was no backup system for the engine that powered the module into orbit. Columbia lacked the capability to stage a rescue on the moon, so unless Eagle left by its own means, it wouldn't have left at all. Once in lunar orbit, Eagle prepared for reunion with the mothership by initiating a series of complex redocking procedures. The hookup with Columbia went smoothly, and the three space pioneers were together again. Preparations began for the flight back to Earth, a distance of 241,000 miles, and the end of their historic voyage. Neil Armstrong once recalled a recurring dream he had as a child. Just by holding my breath, he said, I could hover over the ground. I neither flew nor fell in those dreams, I just hovered. Now that frustrating dream was over for Neil for good, as Apollo 11 put its house in order and put on its best face for a triumphant re-entry.
Open up the LRL doors, Charlie. Roger, we got you coming home.
The U.S. Navy carrier Hornet waited for the returning space capsule in the anticipated splashdown area in the Pacific Ocean. President Nixon was as expectant as anyone on board. When Neil Armstrong was 6, his father skipped church one Sunday and took the boy for his first plane ride in a Ford tri-motor called the Tin Goose. Now, Armstrong was flying with a lot more pressure on him, a force of about 6 Gs, but with no less style. Once recovery was complete, the astronauts were required to put on protective biological garments. Scientists didn't think there were microorganisms on the moon, but to minimize any chance of epidemics breaking out here on Earth, rigid quarantine measures were adopted. Although they would have to live in isolation for 21 days, there was no chance that these astronauts would feel neglected or overlooked. It was time to decompress emotionally too, and to do that, Neill drew on his experience playing in a teenage band called the Mississippi Moonshiners. Robert Goddard gained recognition posthumously when the Goddard Space Center was named after him. Neil Armstrong took part in Apollo 11's worldwide goodwill tour, but the astronaut with the most potential for stardom preferred a low profile in his post-NASA years. He taught aeronautical engineering, developed aviation software, and served on the panel investigating the Challenger disaster, which killed 7 astronauts. The price of space exploration remains high, and so does the reward.
When those 2 Americans stepped on the moon, the people of this world were brought closer together. That it is that spirit, the spirit of Apollo, that America can now help to bring to our relations with other nations.
Man doesn't live by bread alone. He has to have something spiritual. And if he takes time some night to just look at the firmament and see the wheeling stars and planets there, surely there must be some stirrings that he'd like to know what is there, what is the meaning of this, what is our role in all this.
America's race to the moon began in the threatening atmosphere of the Cold War, but it developed a momentum that went beyond world power politics. The nation literally went to work for the objectives of Apollo 11, and behind every flight were an estimated 12,000 companies and 325,000 workers. When the mission succeeded, not only the United States, but virtually the whole world was moonstruck for a time. As science fiction novelist Arthur C. Clarke observed, Apollo 11 opened the door to infinity. Today, probes of deep space continue as debate unfolds on the future of the space program and the question of man's ultimate place in a universe 7.5 billion miles wide. The lone wolf of Mescalero Ranch gave much thought to that question, And though his dream of flight was not realized in his lifetime, surely he believed somewhere in the course of time, a like-minded dreamer would come along with the correct answer.